My name is Daniel, and I've been a truck driver for 12 years now. I haul cargo across state lines for big grocery chains and distribution centers that don't sleep. Most of the time it's food. Sometimes it's fuel. Sometimes it's whatever keeps the shelves full so other people don't have to think about where things come from. I've been married a long time, and I've got one kid who's smarter than I ever was at that age. That's the whole reason I stay on the road as long as I do. College is expensive, and pride doesn't pay tuition. Every mile I drive is part of a bigger plan, even if it doesn't feel big while I'm, sitting in traffic or waiting on a dock at 2 a.m. I spend most of my days alone in the cab. I've driven through more places than I can count. Big cities, small towns, stretches of highway where it feels like nothing exists but, the road and sky. I have seen places grow and places fade. Some towns look like they're holding on. Others look like they've already let go. After a while, you get good at noticing that sort of thing. I keep my logbook clean and up to date. Miles, fuel, delivery times. Everything written down the way it's supposed to be. Paperwork matters here. People ask if driving gets boring. I tell them no, it gets comfortable. I've got plenty of stories from the road. Enough to keep someone awake longer than they planned. Most of them are harmless, and a few are strange. All of them happened while I was just doing my job. And if you really want to know where it all started, the long night I still think about, it started thanks to my love of pancakes. Now, the road has a way of settling into patterns if you drive it long enough, and that's usually where stories start. After a while, you learn which exits are worth taking and which ones you don't want to take. You learn where the decent bathrooms are, which stations keep the pumps working light, and which diners won't look at you funny if you walk in at 3 a.m. wearing a jacket that smells like diesel. Over time, you stop experimenting and start returning to the places that treat you right. And that's how I ended up at Matilda's. Now, Matilda's sits just off Highway 50, far enough from the road that you don't hear traffic unless you're listening for it. The sign out front, it's old, with a cartoon woman holding a coffee pot and smiling with these big white teeth. The lights buzz a little at night, but they always stay on. I've been stopping there for about 3 years, whenever my drives line up right, and I have never once seen the place closed. It isn't fancy. The booths are vinyl and cracked in places, and I'm pretty sure they haven't been reupholstered since the 1980s. The tables wobble if you lean on them wrong. There's a jukebox in the corner that only plays 3 songs, and 2 of them skip in the same spot every time. Nobody bothers to fix it. It's just part of how the place sounds now. What matters is the food. Matilda's makes their pancakes from scratch. You can tell. They don't come out uniform or perfectly round. The edges are uneven, and they soak up butter the way pancakes are supposed to. None of that pre-made batter that tastes like it came off a shelf, They bring the plate out hot, with steam rolling off it, and they don't rush you. The coffee comes with free refills, no questions asked, and the mugs are thick enough that you don't burn your hands. For a trucker who lives on the 2 C's, carbs and caffeine, it's about as close to perfect as you're gonna get. That's the reason I kept coming back. No mystery to it, right? If you find a place that feeds you well and doesn't give you trouble, you remember it. I usually came in late, sometimes just before midnight, sometimes closer to dawn. Matilda's never seemed to care. The same waitresses worked most nights, and they got to know me well enough that I didn't have to order out loud. Pancakes, extra butter, coffee. That was it. It took a while before I noticed anything strange. Now, there's a booth near the back wall, 7th one from the corner if you count from left to right. Booth 7. And for the longest time, I didn't pay attention to it. Then one night I realized there was a man sitting there, and the next time I came back, he was there again. He wore a trench coat, even in the summer. It was dark. He also wore a hat that looked like something out of an old detective movie, pulled low over his face. The most noticeable thing was the sunglasses. Real thick lenses, dark enough that you couldn't see his eyes at all. He wore them no matter what time it was or what the weather looked like outside. And he always had a newspaper open in front of him. Well, at first, I thought he was just another regular. Every diner has one. But over time, it became hard to ignore how consistent he was. I came in on different days, at different hours, weeks apart sometimes, and he was always in booth 7. Same coat, same hat, same paper, same posture. I never saw him eat. Well, eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked the waitress about him. Her name was Linda, and she'd been working there longer than I'd been stopping by. I nodded toward booth 7 and asked if the guy ever left. She glanced over, shrugged, and said he was waiting for someone. She said it like she'd said it 100 times before. According to her, he always ordered the same thing: black coffee, no cream, no sugar. He'd sit there for hours, pay his tab, and leave. Then he'd be back the next time someone noticed. Nobody knew who he was waiting for exactly. I noticed the marks on his arms not long after that. If you walked past his booth on the way to the restroom, you could see them where the sleeves of his coat pulled back. Dark, uneven patches, looked like old burns. Not fresh, but not faded either. He didn't try to hide them. He also didn't seem to care if anyone saw. I kept my distance, it's not my business. Anyway, one night I was heading out. I saw him stand up from the booth. He moved real stiff, like someone who wasn't used to sitting for a long time. As he passed by, something slipped out of his briefcase and landed on the floor near my feet. He didn't notice. He pushed through the door and was gone before I could say anything. I picked it up and saw it was a brochure. Looked old. The print was faded, but readable. It was advertising a fallout bunker, the kind they used to sell in the late 1950s and early 60s. Backyard insulation, reinforced walls, long-term supplies, protection for the whole family. I recognized it right away. My grandfather had shown me something like it once when I was a kid, talking about the Cold War and what people were afraid of back then. The dates on the brochure matched that era. I stood there for a minute, holding it, waiting to see if the guy would come back. He didn't. I asked Linda if she'd seen him leave, and she said she hadn't noticed. So I folded the brochure and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Figured if I saw him again, I'd give it back. I finished my coffee, paid the check, and went back out to the truck. The next week passed the way most weeks do on the road, measured in miles, delivery windows, and whatever I could grab to eat between shops. By the time my drive put me back near Highway 50, I didn't even have to think about where I was going to stop. I pulled off the exit, parked the truck where I always did, and walked up to Matilda's like I had done many times before. The night was quiet. Inside, diner looked the same as it always had. Same booths, same jukebox, same smell of coffee and butter. I ordered my usual and took my time with it. Pancakes were good, like always. I drank more coffee than I needed, refilling the mug without paying attention to how late it was getting. At some point, I realized I didn't feel like sitting inside anymore. Matilda's didn't mind if you stepped outside with your coffee, as long as you brought the mug back. So I picked mine up and walked out the side door. I leaned against the wall, near the edge of the building. I looked up at the sky. Out there, away from the highway lights, you could see more stars than people expect. I stood there thinking about the next leg of the drive, and how the inventory was stacked in the trailer. Which stores needed priority. How long it'd take to reach the next town if I didn't hit traffic. I turned the corner to take a look. Behind the diner, the lights were dimmer, just enough to see the dumpsters lining up along the wall. Standing near them was the man from booth 7. The trench coat hung differently on him than it had inside. Looked loose, like it didn't fit his frame the way it used to. He was bent forward at an angle that didn't seem comfortable. His back curved more than I remembered. For a moment, I told myself it was nothing. My kid had scoliosis, and I've learned not to jump to conclusions about posture. People carry pain in different ways. I took a step closer, thinking I might ask him if he needed help. Before I could say anything, he bent further down and vomited onto the pavement. What hit the ground wasn't anything I recognized. Wasn't liquid. It came out thick and black, piling onto itself before starting to move. It writhed against the concrete, slick and heavy, like it was alive. It reminded me of an arrow squid, the way it twisted and pushed against its own ink. I stood still, holding my coffee, trying to understand what I was looking at. The man straightened up slowly. He reached into his coat, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped his mouth with care. For just a second, his sunglasses slipped down his face, and I saw eyes, 5 of them, scattered across his pale face and damp forehead. They blinked, but not together. Each one moved on its own, opening and closing at different times. I didn't wait to see more. I stepped back and pressed myself against a maintenance door near the wall, keeping still as he turned in my direction. He adjusted his sunglasses, setting them back into place, and walked past me without changing his pace. I stayed where I was, and I listened as he crossed the lot. A moment later, I heard a car door open and shut. When I looked out, I saw him get into an old blue Chevy parked near the edge of the lot. The engine started, and the car pulled away, heading back toward the highway. I stood there for a while after that. When I finally looked back toward the dumpsters, the black thing was still there. It had shifted closer to the shadows between the bins. I watched as it slid out of sight behind them. I went back inside, didn't finish the coffee. I paid my check, nodded to Linda, and I just walked out without saying anything. I got back in the truck and started the engine. Well, after that night behind the diner, I changed my dining habits without meaning to. I told myself it was just timing, that my deliveries didn't line up with Highway 50 for a while. But that wasn't the whole truth. I stayed busy, took longer drives, and stopped at places I didn't care much for. I ate fine and drank plenty of coffee. I just didn't go back to Matilda's. A full week passed before my schedule brought me close again. And by then it was impossible to miss. I saw the lights from a mile out, red and blue flashing against the dark, bouncing off the empty road. When I pulled off the exit, the parking lot was blocked by police cars and yellow tape. The windows were boarded up, rough plywood nailed over the glass. The sign was still there, but the lights were off. I parked further back than usual and walked up. One of the officers stepped forward before I could get close. Young, maybe mid-20s, with a jacket that looked stiff and new. His name tag read Jim. "Evening, sir, this place is closed," he said. "Yeah, I can see that. I'm a regular. I stopped here a lot. What happened?" He hesitated and looked over his shoulder, then back at me. "You with the owner?" I shook my head and said no, just a regular. Told him I'd been going down here for 3 years now for pancakes and coffee. Jim sighed and looked at the building. "Well, all right, you might as well hear it. Can't hurt at this point. Couple days ago, the assistant cook didn't show up for his shift. Older guy, kept to himself. Never missed a day before." "Someone reported it?" I asked. "The waitress did. Said 6 hours went by and he never called. That wasn't like him." "So you searched the place," I said. Jim scratched his head again. Yeah, front to back. When we opened the freezer, we found him. Dead. No signs of trauma. Nothing that explained it right away." He told me that the freezer door was too heavy for one person to open or close from the inside. That explained why they had multiple cooks in the kitchen at all times for such a small diner. He continued, "That's right, and that wasn't even the strangest part. The freezer was full with squid, floor to ceiling. Just squid," he said. "That doesn't make sense," I muttered, thinking new officers sure do give people a lot of information, but I was very interested. Jim nodded. "Yeah, that's what we thought. This place serves bacon and pancakes. They don't use squid for anything." The young officer added that they also found squid in the cook's car, trunk, and front seat. "Yeah, and more squid in his locker. Personal locker in the back. Same thing, no explanation," he said. I didn't say anything for a moment. Jim watched me closely. "You look like you're trying to remember something." "Well, there was a man who sat here a lot, back booth. He had a trench coat," I said. Jim shook his head. "We didn't find anyone like that. You mean a suspect?" "I don't know what I mean. Just somebody I noticed." Jim let out a breath. "Well, we're not sure what this is yet. Could be someone sick. Could be someone trying to make a point. Right now, I'm new on the job, but this is the strangest thing I've ever seen." I looked past them at the boarded windows. I asked if the diner was going to reopen. Jim told me it would reopen, just under a different name. He explained that the owner had sold the place, that it'd be given a new name, and that the interior would be updated, but the building itself would stay the same. I asked what would happen to the people who work there. Jim said most of them were staying on. Jobs were hard to come by, and people tended to hold on to the ones they had. I nodded and told him I understood, and the case never went anywhere after that. For a while it stayed in the local news. There were a few short updates, all saying the same thing. No suspects, no clear cause, no explanation that made sense on paper. Eventually something else took its place. Different story, different problem, that's how it works. People talk about strange things until something newer comes along. Matilda stayed boarded up for a few months. Then the signs came down. The plywood disappeared. A new name went up in its place, painted clean and bright. Someone fixed the lights and replaced the booths. The jukebox didn't come back. Heard it looked nice, more modern. Most of the people stayed on. Waitresses, the dishwasher, the cook who took over the missing man's shifts. Jobs were still jobs, and that part hadn't changed. You could update the walls and menus, but the work stayed the same. I figured that if I ever stopped there again, I'd see the man in the trench coat sitting in booth 7 like nothing had happened. Same newspaper, same coffee. Some things don't leave just because a place changes its name. I never went back to find out. I adjusted my drives when I could. If Highway 50 showed up on the schedule, I made sure I passed through it without stopping. Didn't tell anyone why. There are plenty of diners out there. Plenty of places to get pancakes. Still, every now and then, when I drove past that exit at night, I checked my mirrors a little longer than usual. Once or twice, I thought I saw an old blue Chevy hanging back on the road behind me. It never followed all the way. It always turned off before I did, just far enough back that I couldn't be sure. That wasn't the last strange thing I ran into on the job. Not even close. If you drive long enough, you collect stories. The next one happened months later, in a place that wasn't on my regular road at all. After Matilda's, I went back to driving the way I always had, letting the road decide what came next. A few months later, one of my deliveries took me through Nebraska. That doesn't happen often for me. My usual work keeps me farther south and west, but every now and then a shipment gets changed and I end up somewhere new. It's one of the things I like about this job. You can drive the same highways for years, then suddenly the land changes around you, and it starts feeling fresh. Yellowfield is one of those places. You see it long before you reach it. Miles and miles of cornfields stretched out on both sides of the road. Flat and open as far as the eye can go. In the right light, field looks like an ocean, all yellow and gold, moving gently when the wind comes through. I have driven through plenty of farmland over the years, but there's something about that part of Nebraska that always sticks with me. The town of Yellowfield sits right in the middle of it. It's an old farming town. It's been around since the early 1930s. Corn has always been the backbone of the place. Everything there traces back to planting, harvesting, storing, and selling corn in one form or another. There's one major grocery store where I make my delivery, a big concrete building that services the whole area. Aside from that, the town mostly takes care of itself. Small shops, local farms, people who know each other's names and don't feel the need to rush. I don't come through Yellowfield often, maybe once every year or two, depending on contracts. Every time I do, it looks about the same. This time was different. I arrived in mid-spring, just after a long winter had finally broken. The locals called it the last frost. According to the guy at the grocery store dock, it marked the end of the cold season and the beginning of planting. The fields were empty for the moment, nothing growing yet, but the land still looked yellow in the early light, covered in dried stalks from the last harvest. The town itself felt busy in a way I hadn't seen before. As I drove in, I noticed more cars than usual parked along the main road. There were banners strung between streetlights and booths set up along the sidewalks. People were walking around in groups, talking and laughing. I even spotted a few other trucks parked near the edge of town, rigs I recognized from the road. That caught my attention. Well, I made my delivery first. That part was smooth. The store manager signed the paperwork, thanked me, and mentioned that I'd picked a good week to come through. When I asked what he meant, he told me the festival was starting that night. I followed the sound of it toward the center of town. Yellowfield had turned the whole main strip into a celebration. Booths line the street, each one selling something made from corn. Corn pie, corn chowder, corn bread, that's good. Corn candy wrapped in bright paper, fried corn on sticks, popcorn in every flavor you could imagine. Someone even had corn beer on tap at the local bar. Well, I didn't hesitate. Like I said, truckers survive off the 2 C's, carbs and caffeine. This was the carbs part. I tried a little of everything. I've never claimed to have refined taste, and food like that is right up my alley. I ate standing up, leaning against railings, chatting with vendors who were happy to explain how long their families had been here. I ran into a few other truckers I knew, guys I'd crossed paths with over the years. We compared drives, talked about schedules, and complained about fuel prices, the way truckers always do. A couple of them had decided to stay the night, too. The festival didn't feel like something you rushed through. As the evening went on, the town stayed lively. Music played from somewhere near the square. People moved from booth to booth with food in their hands. Kids ran around with paper cups of popcorn. I felt like the whole place had decided to show itself off at once. I checked my schedule, realized I didn't have anywhere to be until morning. Delivery was done, next stop wasn't far, and I decided to stay the night. There was a small motel on the edge of town that still had vacancies, and I grabbed a room before they filled up. Later, a group of us ended up at the local watering hole. The corn beer was stronger than it tasted, went down easy, and it was a good night, simple and loud in the right ways. I was the first one to call it. I said my goodbyes, stepped out into the cool spring night and walked back toward the motel. The festival sounds carried behind me as I went. I remember thinking that Yellowfield felt alive in a way I had not seen before. I went to bed early, not knowing the horror that awaited me. I woke up the next morning to noise outside the motel. First, I thought it was part of the festival carrying on early, but that didn't fit. The sounds were uneven, voices overlapping, someone crying. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes, trying to get my bearings. Then I went to the window and looked out. People were gathered in the parking lot and along the road. A woman stood near the entrance with her hands covering her face. A few men were talking in low voices. I recognized some of the other truckers from the night before. They were standing together, not joking or drinking coffee. They looked alert. I pulled on my jacket and went downstairs. No one stopped me when I stepped outside. I walked over to the group of truckers, and one of them turned when he saw me. His name was Ben. I'd known him on and off for years. He didn't waste time easing into it.
"It's Sullivan. They found him."
"Found him where?" I asked. Ben looked away before answering.
"Out in one of the cornfields, not far from town."
Another trucker filled in the rest. Sullivan had been found strung up on a pole in the middle of a farmer's field. He was dead when they got to him. Whoever did it had emptied his insides and filled the space with corn husks and seeds. There was a fire pit nearby, with dark stains on the ground. The working theory was that his organs had been burned there. People around us were crying openly now. Someone said the police had already been called. Others said they'd be there soon. The town felt like it folded in on itself overnight. I asked if anyone had seen anything unusual the night before. Anybody hanging around? Anyone Sullivan had been talking to? Nobody had a clear answer. Some of the town residents stood a short distance away watching us. I noticed how their attention shifted when we spoke. The mood changed fast. Conversations cut short. A few people started loading things into their cars. Tourists began leaving, one by one, without stopping to browse or ask questions. Ben stepped closer and lowered his voice around us, and we had to lean in real close to hear what he said.
"I did have something strange happen. Last night, kid knocked on my motel door. Twice. He asked if I had ketchup. Said he wanted it for his apple."
I paused. That's weird, but kids do weird things. Ben shrugged.
Yeah, maybe, but when I looked at this kid, I swear to you, his eyes were black. All of it. No white at all.
Before anyone could ask more questions, police cars pulled up. Officers stepped out and started directing people away from the road. Someone told us to clear the area and wait inside if we had rooms. The conversation ended there. As I went back toward the motel, my mind kept circling back to Matilda's. I hadn't talked about it since it happened, but I remembered it. The man in the trench coat, the squid thing, the way things had come apart without warning. I'd driven through this part of the country before. Strange disappearances weren't unheard of. People went missing from time to time. Accidents happened, but this was different. I packed my things without taking my time. I checked my maps and decided not to wait for anything else to develop. Whatever was going on in Yellowfield, it wasn't something I wanted to be near. I loaded up the truck, and I left town as soon as I could. Well, I went back to work. I stayed closer to home when I could. Yellowfield didn't come up again for a long time, and I didn't bring it up myself. It was easier that way. Some places are better left where you found them. Months passed. One evening, I came home to find my wife on the couch watching TV. She always liked true crime shows. What is it with women and true crime? Well, it's her way of relaxing, I guess. The way some people unwind with sitcoms and sports. I didn't pay much attention at first. Kicked off my boots, grabbed both of us a drink, and I sat down next to her. And then I heard the name. Yellowfield, Nebraska. I looked at the screen and saw footage of cornfields, aerial shots of empty roads, and old photographs of a town I recognized right away. My wife noticed my reaction and muted the TV. "This one came up. I thought of you. You've been there before, right?" she asked. I nodded and told her yes. She turned the sound back on. The documentary laid it out slowly and plainly. According to the investigation, Yellowfield had been dealing with disappearances for decades. Tourists, drifters, seasonal workers, people who passed through and didn't have ties to the area. For a long time, the cases never connected. The town was small, the records were scattered. Nothing pointed to a pattern until someone started looking closely. Eventually, they found one. The program explained that a small group within the town followed a set of religious beliefs that didn't appear anywhere official. They weren't part of a recognized church. They met privately. Their practices centered around harvest cycles and offerings. Over time, those offerings turned into people. The murders happened around the same time every year, just before planting or harvest. The victims were chosen carefully. Outsiders who wouldn't be missed right away. People who passed through quietly. For years, the group managed to avoid attention by spacing things out and keeping numbers low. According to the documentary, though, they got careless. They wanted more. Better harvest, faster growth. They took the trucker named Sullivan because he was there, and because they thought no one would connect it back to them. That was the mistake. His death brought attention they couldn't control. The documentary named the thing they worshipped. They called it Namor, the god of harvest and rebirth. The rituals were meant to ensure prosperity, renewal, and protection for the town. Human sacrifice was part of that system, especially during pre-harvest seasons. In the months after Sullivan's death, bodies began turning up in the surrounding farmland. They were found in open fields, far from the town center, scattered across properties that had once been actively worked. Most of the bodies showed the same disturbing pattern. By the time authorities pieced it together, most of the group had already disappeared. Some fled, some refused to cooperate. Others were found dead under unclear circumstances. Without enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved, the case stalled. And today, Yellowfield sits mostly abandoned. The camera showed empty streets, boarded houses, and fields that hadn't been tended to in months. The grocery store was closed. The motel stood empty. What was once a lively town had hollowed out from the inside. When the documentary ended, my wife turned to me and asked if I was alright. I told her I was. And I made a promise that night. I told her I'd stay away from Yellowfield and anywhere like it. I'd keep my drives closer to home when possible. I told her that some places aren't meant to be passed through more than once. She hugged me and said she was glad, and that she was just happy to have me home more. While we sat there, I could hear my kid playing upstairs, moving from room to room, making noise the way kids do when they have nowhere else to be. I stayed there with her for a while longer, listening to the TV and the sounds of the house. Everything felt normal. The road was behind me for a moment, and I didn't need to think about the next delivery. Still, even with all that, I couldn't shake the feeling of some of the things I'd seen. Well, those are two of the strangest stories I carry with me. I hope you've enjoyed them. I've got others. Every trucker does. When you spend enough years driving across states at odd hours, you see some weird things. Most of the people you meet are ordinary. Some are kind, some are tired. A few are hard to forget. Some places stay with you a long time. Towns built around a strange idea. Diners that serve pancakes and have a strange booth in the back.
Fields that look peaceful until you learn their real history. The road connects all of it, whether it should or not.